Well, hello and welcome. My name is Dana Jones and I'm the disability coordinator here on campus. So if students need accommodations, they come and see me. I'm presenting with Paula Rodriguez and she is the supervisor of the testing center. So we'll kind of talk about her role in all of this and how students will go into the testing center to get accommodations as well. So she'll talk about her piece. We very much appreciate being here today, and the number one thing we want you to get out of it is just to know who we are, to get our numbers down in our emails and call us for anything. So we're going to give you a lot of information today. It's going to go very, very fast. A lot of this probably is not going to make sense until you get that first accommodation letter and you're going to be like, what was all of that? And that is okay. Call us at that time. So that is the number one thing to get out of it, is just to know who we are and to know to call us. So our phone numbers and email addresses are on there. It's in the fine print, but we can always come back to this slide if you need that. So with the Disability Access Services, that's the name of our office. We go by DAS. We are located in the College Center. They kind of put me behind the counter. So if you just go into the information counter and ask to see Dana, they'll get you in touch with me. The testing center is in the College Center as well. It's located upstairs. Once you go up to the steps, you go to the right in the far back corner, so you know where we're located. The Disability Access Services Office, we have to comply with two laws. And really, it's the Office of Civil Rights is the overarching office. And the Office of Civil Rights, OCR, will come in and make sure that we're doing things that we're in compliance. And when OCR comes to see us, if we have to get one of those learning opportunities, which we haven't so far, so we're going to stay away from that, they will also come and see you if you're involved in it. So that's kind of a myth that some instructors have, is that it's all going to come through my office, and it is not. You are going to be involved in that learning process, and it's not one that we want to be learning at this point. So please call it anytime if you have questions. Basically what it is just to make sure that we're providing equal opportunity for all students and not discriminating. Reasonable accommodations that we put in place, and I'll tell you how that process looks, but the reason we do that is to make sure that we level the playing field, but we're not fundamentally altering the program. So we don't have to go way above and beyond, we just have to put in reasonable things to level that playing field. We also don't have to do anything that provides an undue financial hardship. So for example, if a student is in a hospital bed and needs an assistant to come into the classroom, we don't have to provide that assistant. Okay, we don't have to provide above and beyond those kind of things. And then we just have to make sure that we don't pose direct threats to the health or safety of students. So a big one that comes into play on this, a lot of times people ask me, is service dogs. So we do allow service dogs on our campus. We will talk about that. But what if there's a student in the classroom or the instructor is allergic to service or to dogs? And so we'll talk about that. We just do it on a case-by-case basis. But that's where, you know, when we put in accommodations, we're going to make sure that there's not a direct threat to anybody else as well as the student. So the simplest process for a student to go through, the simplest, is if they register for classes, then they come and see me. That kind of makes it a lot easier for them, kind of saves some steps, because we're going to put accommodations in place for a student based on the classes they're taking, which is pretty common sense. If they're taking a ceramics class, probably don't need a note taker. If they're taking biology, probably do need a note taker. So at that point, that's when we look at their documentation and we see what needs to be put in place for each semester. Once accommodations are requested, we have to address it. So it could be something that's pretty outlandish. Could be something I'm going to call you on those, and you're thinking, why are you even bothering me? We have to at least address it. Whether we put that accommodation in place or we don't, we have to address it and we have to show that we've addressed it. Then we send letters to the professors letting them know what accommodations are in place. At that point, we do not disclose what the disability is. We ask that the students disclose that. I'm not allowed to disclose that unless it's an educational reason that you need to know, which we can pretty much say there would be an educational purpose for you to know what their disability is so you can work with them a little bit better. Most of our students on this campus so far have been willing to kind of disclose that. If you call me and you want to know what the disability is, we'll talk about that, but more than likely I will share that and you can kind of figure that out as well. There are a couple of disabilities where, like if they're on the autism spectrum or they're deaf and they have an interpreter, I do get their permission to contact you right away because we provide you with some other accommodations and documentation so that you know how to work with students. And then again, we ask the students to advocate for themselves. So at that point, it's a little different than in a K through 12 setting. In K through 12 setting, the responsibility is up to the staff, the faculty, to make sure accommodations are put in place. Here on the college level, it's up to the students. So the students have to come to my office. We don't seek them out. And then once the accommodations are put in place, the student follows through to make sure everything is happening. They come to me if something's not working. I don't keep coming and checking into you. And a lot of times that's a misnomer. Instructors will call me pretty frustrated that I don't make sure everything's in place, that the student didn't do their due diligence. The responsibility is on the student. So I'm not going to follow up, and I'm not going to be reaching out to you unless there's a concern. You reach out to me or the student reaches out to me, and then I will. Do you guys have any questions on that process? Yes?
Maybe it's too early in the presentation, but I had 3 students where I got a letter that said you need to make accommodations. And I went to each of them and said, okay, I'm ready, this is whatever. And each one of them said, oh, that was for something in the past and I don't need that. Am I off the hook?
Great question. Great, beautiful. And actually I would document everything is what we need to do. So a couple of things with that. You bring up a couple of good points. One is a student might put accommodations in place just kind of as a safety net. Sometimes just having it there makes them feel better. They don't ever really use the accommodations, and they have that right. A great example of this is a student might ask for extended time on testing. Once they get into your classroom, they understand how your tests work, they might choose to stay in the classroom and take the test. And so at that point, they'll say, I don't need those accommodations. And they have the right to do that. So they might take the quizzes in the classroom, they might take chapter 1 in the classroom, but when it comes to midterm, they might decide they want to go to the testing center, and they can do that. The responsibility is up to them to let you know that in time. So if they come the day of the test and make the change, you absolutely do not have to accommodate that, but just document that. We ask for a couple of days in advance, and I explain this to all students. And so right now, just so you know, and Paula, I'll probably say it a couple of times, just know they're going to try to put the blame back on me, and they're going to tell you a lot of things that I'm really bad at. You need to know when they come into my office, they say the same things to me about you. So we just have a personal, professional courtesy right here. I know you're doing a great job. You know I'm doing a great job. We just have to help the student get to the point that they need to be, right? So don't believe everything they say because they'll say things like that. But in that, you just need to make sure that the student is clear on what they want, and then just document that. The other thing with that is we've got a new system to generate letters, and it's not good. It was a really good sales pitch. It's not a very good system. So we are not able to separate out. It used to be in the past, we could separate out each class, each accommodation. Now we just have to do one general letter, so not all of the accommodations fit each class. And so that's where the student might say to you, that was for something different, that's for a different class I'm taking, I don't need that in your class, and then you are off the hook on that piece of it, okay? When you get the accommodation letter, I applaud you for reaching out to the student. You don't necessarily have to do that. The onus is on the student, but I still would do that. I would always just contact them, but if you do it, make sure you do it when nobody else is around. We have to make sure that we keep that confidentiality. So you might just say, hey, can I see you after class? Do you have time to come to office hours? And then you can touch base there. I encourage every single student to touch base with their instructors to let the instructors know what they do need and what they don't need. Obviously, it's like everything. Some are better than others at doing it. But you can always feel free to call me, send me an email, questions like that, even just to kind of make sure that you're doing the right thing. Just say, hey, they said they don't need them. Are you comfortable with this? What else do I need to do? And I'll help you through each step of that. But that might be why they just decide not to do it. In the K through 12 setting, what I'm finding is a lot of students, I think we try to do the right thing in K through 12. We just haven't really always figured it out with special ed yet. And I used to be in K through 12, so I know that. So a lot of students don't want to come in college and disclose that they have the disability. They might do it because a parent pushes them. Sometimes a staff member from the K through 12 setting comes with them to get the accommodations in my office set up, and I can tell that student's never going to follow through once that person leaves. And so a lot of times that's what happens as well. Does that make sense? They get it set up, but they're not going to use it because they don't want to have the same experience that they did in K through 12 where it probably wasn't very positive. But for the most part, I think, here at Ames, we're pretty lucky. Once we talk to the student, most of the students do come and talk to their instructors. There's very, very few that really have such a negative taste about it that they just kind of let it go. Most of them, it's pretty positive experience. So again, the overarching office that we have to work under is OCR. From there, with my office, my supervisor is Sandra Owens, and she is legal counsel here at Ames. And then it goes to the president. So we go pretty quickly up the chain, and then it's OCR. So we have some heavy administration above us. And again, once an accommodation is made, we must address it. So there might be some outlandish things that I call you on. It's not saying I think we have to do it. We just have to have that discussion and document it. And then again, there's no absolutes. So the one thing that I caution you on is we can never say things like, well, I never allow that, or that will never happen. A prime example is a lot of students will ask for notes on math tests. Okay, since I've been here, we have done it once because it made sense. When that happens, usually I'm in contact with the professor. Sometimes we get the chair involved. Paula's involved, I'm involved. We look at the documentation, we look at the student, what they're saying, we contact the instructor, we make that decision together. So those decisions, I will not come through with an iron hand that says that you must, unless we must. And that's just, at that point, it's going to be a legal thing that I'm going to say, you know what, we have to do this. But, that's pretty outlandish to get notes on the tests for everything. That's not really our purpose. So if we do it, we take a lot of time and make the best decision. It's not like we just hand this out as candy and say, oh, whatever you want, sure, you get that. Okay, so some of those, we just can't say we never do that. With the no absolutes, the burden of proof lies on the institution. So if a student is upset and makes a claim against us to the Office of Civil Rights, they're going to come in and look at us. It could be up to a 7-year process that they look at just one situation. And they're going to look at everything. The burden of proof is on us to prove why we did or didn't do what we did. Whether we're right or we're wrong, it's just on us. So there's a lot of processes that have to go through in that to show why we made that decision. So sometimes we think outside the box and we get a little bit creative and we try to make it negotiable. The one thing we don't want to do is ever set it up that the student has to just negotiate that with the professor. So if you're starting to talk about tests and how to do that, extended time, all those kind of things, if you want to bring me in, I welcome that. Because we don't want to ever put the student in the predicament where they feel that the instructor is dictating what needs to happen, and then they make a complaint against us. And students will try to negotiate some of those things with you. They get pretty creative on things that they ask for. They also get very creative on telling you that Dana said this is okay. Dana will put it in writing if Dana said it was okay. So just so you know, okay? So, we all have rights and responsibilities through this, and they're pretty common sense kind of things. The student has the right to be evaluated based on ability, not disability. And again, when midterms come and that F is starting to kind of show it's going to be pretty solid, that's kind of when we get in the panic mode and we get a lot of, well, they're discriminating against me. They're doing this based on my disability. And we just want to make sure that we're always looking at the ability, what they can do, and trying to meet those needs there. They have the right to have an equal opportunity. They have a right to request those accommodations, but again, it has to be in a timely manner. So still, I've been in this job for 4 years. I still have students come in the day before their final, which I don't get this, but they want accommodations at that point. We may or may not put them in place if it's something that we can get. And at that point, they want extended time on that test, that last test, thinking that's going to help their grade. Again, that's when I contact the instructor to see if we can make something like that happen. But every semester we've had this, so we've done it for many semesters. And they have the right to appeal a decision if they don't believe that they're being accommodated either by my office or within the classroom. They're responsible for self-identifying. They have to provide documentation to us. So some colleges are a little bit different. Some colleges, if a student comes in and says they have a need, they have some type of disability, they need this accommodation, colleges might provide that. There's some colleges that want bounds and bounds of documentation, you know, all the testing, all of that. We're kind of in the middle. We ask for something. So we're going to ask for some type of paper, whether it was an old IEP, something from the doctor, or we're going to help them get some type of documentation showing that there is a disability before we put in accommodations. So you as teachers, you're going to see a lot of these letters. You're going to see a lot of extended time on test. Just about every student coming through gets extended time on test. You need to know, again, I don't just hand it out like candy. We go through that process. The documentation supports that. And then they have to maintain academic and technical standards as the code of conduct. So this has come up pretty often here the last few semesters. It seems like every semester we have a different disability that kind of shows themselves, and we've had a lot of students recently on the autism spectrum or with psychological disabilities. So they might have some kind of mental psychological things going on, and sometimes their code of conduct, they believe, or some instructors believe, well gosh, they get accommodations, so I really can't do anything with them. They still need to behave like everybody else in the classroom. So one example might be a student on an autism spectrum. They might just interrupt a lot, right? They might just need that clarification a different way, and they might just interrupt. And that becomes tough on your classroom management when you're trying to give that lecture. So those kind of things we can talk to students about, because the bottom line is no matter who they are or why they're here, they still have to follow the code of conduct. And that's where you can get myself involved, you can get the chair involved, you know, and we'll sit down and talk with those students. And we haven't had really big issues, but they have come to be that sometimes it's a little unique situations that happen in the classroom. So please contact me at any time. Faculty, you have the right to require all students to meet and maintain standards. So the one accommodations we will never put in place is that we will adapt or modify the curriculum. So that's a big one in high schools, that sometimes students, they only have to answer the odd questions. Or they get multiple choice, they only get 2 answers that they have to choose from instead of 4. And I get that request a lot. That doesn't happen here in college. They have to meet the same requirements as everybody else in the classroom. So just keep that in mind. Some instructors here have made changes, and I would not recommend that. If you're thinking about doing that, please call me before you do, because it creates problems for the next class that they go into. So if you, and math, not picking on mathematicians or those professors, but math is an easy one. Sometimes they'll say, oh, you only have to do half of the problems and turn them in. Well, then when they get to that next level math that they all are going to have to do a next level, that instructor doesn't allow that, and then we have trouble because we've allowed it once, and we're not going to allow it the next time. So please just contact me if you have any questions on things like that. Again, here it comes to, you have the right to have a free learning environment, free of disruptions. And then you have the right to ask for the faculty notification letter. So if a student gets accommodations, you will receive a letter. If a student gets accommodations, you will receive a letter. It will come into your Ames email. It is an Ames email. It will say faculty notification letter. If you do not receive that letter, you do not give accommodations unless you're willing to give it to the whole class. We get in trouble with that one as well. So a student will come up and say, you know, I've always had trouble, I need extended time, will you grant that to me? And you have no letter, and you allow that. That gets us in trouble. You need to say, I'd be more than happy to work with you, please go to the Disability Access Office, and they'll get that letter and we'll get it set up for you. So unless you're willing to do it for everybody, do not do it without the letter. Does that make sense? If you question it, you can always call me and say, hey, I didn't get this letter, is this true? And I will make sure either you get the letter or we'll verify that, you know, this student has not come through the office yet. Some students have been here for a while, they still forget they have to do it every semester, so they just assume they have to do it every semester, and students are told that. They know that. It's written down, it's on our website. So, and sometimes that's all it is they just have forgotten for that semester to do it. Again, I don't go through and contact everybody that had accommodations last semester to make sure they're here this semester. They know that they need to do that. There was something else I was going to say along that line. It'll come back to me. So the other thing too is you are responsible to put a documentation, some type of statement in your syllabi saying that if you need accommodations, come to the office. Now we recently here at Ames changed over and we have the main syllabi, it's in there. That will work. You can also put it in. I know some instructors also do a specific one for their class. You can put it in there. If you want to know what the wording is, you can take it off that main syllabi that's out there for everybody, or you can contact me and we can put some type of wording in there. If a student doesn't disclose that they have a disability and they are struggling, you cannot assume it. So that's another big thing to remember. If a student comes after that first or second test, and you know, because as instructors, right, we get that gut feeling. We've been in this business for a while. We know that they're struggling with something and probably could benefit from accommodations. Unless they tell you, you cannot say, hey, seems to me that you have a learning disability and you probably want to go see Dana. Do not say that. If they say things like, you can ask questions like, what did you used to do? Or, back in high school, what kind of things helped you? What kind of strategies? Did you have extra help? Those kind of things. And if they say, oh, I went to a resource room, you can say, hey, you know what? We have a similar service here. Okay? Those kind of things, if they open that up. If they say, you know what, I was recently in a car accident, I hit my head really hard, say, well, you know what, that might be something you want to go and talk to Dana about. At that point, you can say something about it. If they don't disclose and you just know, because you can tell, right, from their work, the way that they're interacting, you can just tell. You might say things like, hey, I just want to tell you all the resources we have on campus. And we know that we tend to remember the first thing we hear and the last thing we hear. So say things like, oh, here are resources on campus are the Disability Access Service Office. We have counseling. We have tutoring. We have SI. Gosh, and did I mention the Disability Access Office? Make it seem like you forget that thing. I do that all the time to try to get students. And I've taught the advisors to do that. Because then we hope that somehow, if we say it a couple of times, they'll disclose something to us, and then you can send them to our office. Okay? And then another big thing is maintain confidentiality with working with students. I can't tell you, every semester I have 2 or 3 where the instructor has called a student out into the office or in front of the classroom, and that is not a good thing. They might say things like, oh yeah, you're going to be the one going up to the testing center to take your test. Don't say things like that. Or, you know what, we had to change the curve of it because some people scored really, really low. They have those disabilities. Don't say things like that because it's only going to get us in trouble. And I know a couple of you laugh and are shocked. It happens every semester where instructors will call students out in front of everybody. Or they'll say things like, oh, you're the one that needs the note taker because he can't keep up. Just common sense dictates. If you wouldn't want somebody to call you out, please don't do that to other people. Bring them off to the side. And then here's the rights and responsibilities. Our office also has the rights and responsibilities that we have to make sure that we're complying with all of the standards. And I'll make sure to contact you if the need arises. So here's some accommodations that we provide. The most common one is testing. It's extended time on test. That's our most common one. And Paula and our offices work very, very well together. Our philosophy is, and our preference is the student needs extended time, they're going up to the testing center so that we make it standard for all. There are some instructors that still like to have it in the classroom. That sometimes has posed some issues. So our preference is if there's any kind of testing accommodation that needs to be put in place, that we would do that through the testing center so that we're just standard for everybody. And so that we have a policy in place. It's a 2-page document now. On the rights and responsibilities of using the testing center. And unfortunately, we have the documentation in place because we've had students that have bucked the system, and now we have to have papers signed to say they will do things appropriately. So again, we try to recommend that all accommodations go through the testing center. The one thing I would strongly ask, if you decide to let the student in your classroom, please do not have them start the test, and when the class is over, they get 20 more minutes. You get, at that point, pick them up and move them to the other office, because that interrupts their testing time, and nobody else had their testing time interrupted. That could get a complaint against us. So it's those kind of things. Instructors will be like, oh, I'll just let you'll take it here, and when everybody else is done, I have more work to do in my office. So at that point, I'll just have you sit outside my office. Do not interrupt that testing time if you have not interrupted it for everybody else. So the accommodations, do not do anything differently on those pieces of it if you haven't done it for the rest of the class. Does that make sense? And that's why we asked that you would do it in the testing center. That's the biggest one for that question.
So basically, and I have not run into this, if someone, came up and said, hey, the class period is an hour and 20 minutes, could I have an extra 20 minutes for the test today? My only options realistically would be at the beginning of the class to say, I will be here for, I will be here in the classroom for 30 minutes. If anybody needs some extra time, that would be okay.
Yes.
Because you could not, at that point, you couldn't send them to the testing center because it's not enough time.
Correct. So what she's saying is if a student comes that morning and that you get like an hour and 20 minutes in the class and they want an additional 20 minutes and they come that morning and ask for it, what do? I'm sorry?
You give everybody.
Yeah, if you have the opportunity to, you might have something else afterwards. You might have another class. There might be another class coming into that room. So just say that to the student. Unfortunately, it's too late notice. There's another class right after this. We don't have the time to do that. There are some students that will have it broken up. I know that there's a couple that come through our office and they do that. They take the test in the class. When everybody else is done, they just walk with the instructor and finish the test outside the office. They've chosen to do that. The student has said to the instructor, I'm okay doing that. If you're comfortable and the student's comfortable, you can do that. But if they complain against it and OCR is coming in, I have nothing to do with that. So you have to justify why you did what you did or didn't do. And you just never know. But certainly, if you'd be willing to give it to everybody and you have the time and the means to stay, absolutely you could do that. But again, that's poor planning on the student's part, and we don't have to accommodate that. Especially if you've had the letter.
It's perfectly acceptable to just say, I can't do that today. If at the next time, if you require extra time, at that point, we have to tell them to officially go to you.
It is perfectly acceptable to say that, yes, that it's too late to get the test up there.
I mean, I've sent several students to the testing center for various reasons. I can't, my car died, whatever.
Right.
And I give them generally whatever time is allotted in the classroom, but it would not be advisable to, if someone said a week before, I'd like to take it in the testing center, and could I have 2 hours? That's not something that I could just, I mean, could I
Yes.
get away with saying,
you absolutely, honestly,
that,
yep.
I would give it to them.
If anybody asked you that and you would do it for anybody, if a student says, hey, a week before the test, I would like 2 hours to take this test, if you're willing to do it for anybody, absolutely you can do that.
So you can, it's okay to do that, and if somebody complains, then you could just say, well, you didn't ask for it. I guess I'm just,
And that's your piece. That's the beautiful piece of it. That's the piece. Because then, I mean, like I might ask that, right? Paula might not ask that, but find out that I got that and then be mad that she didn't ask that. So that's the piece you have to weigh in your mind. That's what you have to justify. If you're willing to do it for all, I would just do it for all ahead of time. Students always have reasons that they didn't get something done or not. And some of them are valid, some of them are not. Just better off that you can be staying standard and consistent, probably the better off you're going to be. But if you're willing to do that for everybody, if that happens, then yeah, that would be up to you. You would just fill out that form for Paula's. As far as accommodations go, if a student gets, typically they get time and a half, right? So most classes are an hour, they get an additional 30 minutes. Very, very few. There's some students here that'll get 200%. Typically, we do that when there's a test reader or a test writer involved. And the reason we do that is because it takes a little bit longer for the test reader or the test writer from Paula's office to get that information out there, right? That makes sense. There's only one student that I know of on our campus that gets 300%, and it was before my time, right? So we just had to grandfather that in. To me, I don't know that I justify 3 hours. So especially if you have a biology class that's 2 hours, right? And you have to give them 3 times that. That's an all-day test. Who's going to do well on that test anyway? Let's be realistic. So at that point, we might just do 200% and put in breaks. We might, some students, we just give them 1 sheet at a time, and the testing center regulates all of that. So there's some other things that we might do to kind of help lessen that. But you know, to be here all day for a test is just kind of insane. So I would not, if it's the 150, I would not give them 200% unless you get that to come through our office. And again, the only reason I beg and plead down on my knees for you is because then I have trouble when it goes to that next instructor. Because you would be willing to do it, the next instructor might not be. That's where we start to get our issues, because the student says, you did it before. Well, yes, we did. And then I have to try to go to that next instructor, and that usually doesn't go well. So we had a couple questions in the back.
So if something happens to a student and the student needs to take it another time, so it should go through your office?
Only if they have a disability and they need accommodations. If your typical student has a car wreck that day and they need to take it another day, that's something that you can just kind of figure out on your own because it's just that one day. You know, they weren't like traumatized, they just had a little fender bender, they missed that test. You can choose how you want to have that test remade.
So they would go and take it at the test center? Or?
If that's how you chose to have that set up. You could choose to do it on your own and do that.
And then making the decision about how long they can have for taking the test, if they have disability, it's through your office?
It is through our office. We will make that.
Tells me
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
so I don't.
Correct. It'll be on the faculty notification letter. We'll tell you exactly how much. And the testing center will be good with helping you figure those times out. Paula has a sheet. She'll go through it with you. We ask that you mark it and pretty clear on it, just so that we're all on the same page and we all know. Okay?
I may have two related questions.
Okay.
One of them's kind of complex. It's actually from last semester. I had 2 students in one class, both of which were supposed to have double time. But I give quizzes sometimes, and they're in class, and then I'll go over them afterwards. And my immediate thought was, well, if it's a 10-minute quiz, that means it's 20 minutes, and then what is everybody else in class doing, just sitting around for 10 minutes, right? But at the same time, it would have taken them 15 minutes to walk over to the testing center and then take it and come back. So I had worked something out where if I knew I was going to give a quiz, even if it was a pop quiz, I'd just make my mind up before class. And I'd email it to them and allow them to, like the night before, and allow them to email it back to me so that it didn't take that class time, and then they could just sit there and go through everything else. But I didn't go through any sort of disability office to do that. So what I'm wondering is, as long as they have accommodations on record like that, is it okay for me to make singular instances where I have agreements like that with them? And if I do that, I guess the 2 parts is, 1, I don't have to offer that to every other student since they don't have accommodations on record. And 2, do I have to notify your office?
No. So let me summarize what his question was, because he's handled it very well. There's multiple ways that you can handle it. In essence, it's when students had like double time on tests, so they get 200%, and he gives quizzes, right? So the typical student you're thinking will take about 10 minutes. So if you were to do double time, that would be 20 minutes out of your lecture for maybe that 1 student, 2 students in the class that gets that. What are you going to do with the rest of your class? And so the way that he solved it was to decide, even if it was a pop quiz, to decide ahead of time and email that quiz to the student so that they could do it at home, and then they emailed it back. So then that student is only sitting for about 10 minutes. In the classroom, rather than having all the other students sit for 20 minutes, right? So on that was a great way to handle it when you talk to the student. You don't think so?
No.
Okay, what's your take on it?
Well, did all the students get to use their notes?
Yes, actually. Originally I hadn't intended that, and then I figured that out as soon as I did that I made all of them open note. I thought that.
That's better.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, so then obviously because they had an unfair advantage. Yeah, so they just make sure that everybody got to use their notes, right? So it was fair for everybody. Because the thing we often forget is we're trying to make it so that the student with disabilities is not being discriminated against. We also have to think about all the other students, that they're not getting discriminated against too, right? And getting an unfair advantage. So we've got to make sure it's fair and equal for everybody, and that's what our office is about. I would say in that situation, you talk to them ahead of time, you were comfortable with it, that would be a way to handle it, absolutely. Another way that you could do it is just to have the student come in 10 minutes before the class and start at 10 minutes before, or do it 10 minutes after. Or another way you could handle it is just to have them go to the testing center after class, or sometime that day, and take that 20-minute quiz. And so those are other options that you can take too. Some instructors do not like students to take it like the day before. They want everybody to be at the testing environment at the same time. So that's something else that you have to think about. Pop quizzes are tough when you have students that get extended time. What you can do is kind of try to fudge a little bit, give a break, you know, those kind of things. You can talk to the students ahead of time to see how they want to handle it. Sometimes you'll see that students don't actually take their full time. So we get that often too. I get instructors that they get a little bit upset that students get so much time and they take it in the testing center, and I say to them, have you ever really looked? The majority of students that get extra time doesn't mean they're taking extra time. A lot of times they're the first ones done, right? Because they struggle anyway. They're the first ones done. So some instructors feel that's an unfair advantage. It's not really, if you ever really look at the time. You know, we've not really ever, written down to try to compare, but I know in the K through 12 setting when I taught, most of the students I worked with that got extended time, they were the first ones done. And I used to say, no, ladies, take your time. But it doesn't matter, you know.
It's probably part of it is the anxiety of the time pressure. So
It
if you
is.
take that anxiety off, they can function.
It is. It is. It's that, and it's, you know, if they struggle reading, giving them 20 extra minutes to read that sentence that they didn't read the first time, that's not really helping them, right? They still are struggling with the reading, so they're going to get done with it at that point. Another question?
The other part of my question, and then the second question. Sorry.
Okay.
The other part was, in those kinds of accommodations, should I notify your office?
No, as long as you're providing the accommodation, you don't have to, if you're comfortable with how you've done it. Yeah.
The second is, are there testing centers or other kinds of accommodations like that available at every Ames campus?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And do they have the same kinds of hours? So if I'm teaching at Loveland, I can have a student go to the Loveland Testing Center and take a test?
No, that becomes a little bit different.
Okay.
Trish, are we okay on time?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
We have until 2:15, and then they have a break from 2:15 to 2:25, so we have a little wiggle room.
Okay.
I was scheduled at 2:50. Julie from Trio.
Oh, that's right. I remember I snuck you in on the break. That's right, no, that's right.
Right. You know what, we have this every time.
Just
I
forget
snuck
that
you
you
in
had
after
break.
the printed. Yeah, yeah.
We have this every time because there's a lot of information and there's a lot of things to know when you get to this point of it. And that's why we say call us, call us, call us. And so we're just trying to give you the touch of it, but please call us. Here's some of the other accommodations. The only other one I want to really touch on real quick is if a student uses a recording device in the classroom, they sign an agreement, so they're not going to use it for non-academic purposes. Sign language interpreter, they also sign an agreement. If a student is utilizing a sign language interpreter and the student does a lot, starts to no-show, please notify my office. There's no way for me to know because I don't keep track on them. We contract out with sign language interpreting services, so it's not like they come to my office and they have to check in. They usually do let me know, but we have a policy if a student starts to no-show, they might lose their privileges. We'll put in some other kind of accommodation. It becomes pretty costly for sign language interpreting. We have to get them for 2 hours at a time. We don't just get for that 1 hour. We have to at least have a 2-hour time period, and it starts anywhere from $75 an hour on up, plus mileage. So if a student's not showing up, this becomes pretty costly to our college. We can't not offer it for that reason, but we can do some other things if it's not benefiting anybody. You had a question?
Yeah, so if they needed to record, so are you going to send us a letter and let us know?
Yep, it's in the faculty notification letter.
The
Yep.
sign language thing, does that also apply to note takers? If a student stops showing up,
yes.
the note taker keeps showing up.
Yes, and so here on our campus, we do something a little bit different with note takers. We have peer note takers. So we ask that instructors help find somebody in the classroom that would be willing to take notes. It's a volunteer basis. We would give them a letter. I'll be more than happy to put it on a resume. We kind of try to sell it that way. But again, we let them know that if they don't show up, the note taker's not there so that they can stay home and sleep in and then get the student's notes. If the student's not in class, they don't get notes that day. Unless it's for a medical reason or something that is legit, then common sense just dictates at that point. The other thing to touch on real quick, books in alternative form. We have some students that are blind or low vision here. We provide those books. It would just be if you have a lot of handouts that might need to be adapted, then we'll contact you and we'll set that up ahead of time with you to make sure that we have it in a means that's available for the student to access. But that's a big question we also get. One other thing I want to say is we just list other on our accommodation form that students can pick from. Flexibility of attendance and assignments. I can tell you it's more of a pain for me, and I have struggles with it than you will ever, okay? If you take attendance in your classroom, I really don't like this one any more than you do, because it's a very, very complicated accommodation to put in place to make sure it's fair and reasonable for everybody, right? So at that point, if a student has flexibility of attendance or assignments, we'll be in contact with each other. I will either call you, email you, or there'll be something that we'll try to get it in place. And students know it's not just a get out of free jail card. I explain that to them. They may not see it that way. The other thing is flexibility on assignments. This is really if they're sick that day and they have to turn in an assignment. This does not say on every single assignment they get 2 or 3 extra days. So be clear on that, okay? This is not every single assignment, because that's modifying the curriculum. This is only when there's a medical emergency, not because their child was sick, but a medical emergency that they had that they need an extra day or 2 to turn in the assignments. And at that point, please, please call me, because most of the time you've given them a week already to complete that assignment. If they don't have it done and ready to go within that next day, you know, we need to be chatting about that and chatting with the student about it, okay? So call me on those kind of things. And then we don't provide tutoring. Tutoring is available for all students. We do provide temporary accommodations, so if somebody breaks their arm or they're pregnant and have some accommodations, we can put in temporary things, so send them to us. The testing center, sorry, Paula.
It's okay. I'll go through this really quick.
Oh, Paula, will you grab the mic
Oh,
from
yeah.
Dana? Thank you.
I'll hand these out.
First of all, I want you all to know that we love senior students up in the testing center, so don't ever feel like you're inconveniencing us. That's our job, and our staff is trained in order to provide accommodations to your students. We're trained to do reading and scribing and all kinds of the other services that we provide up there. So please use us, because we're there for you. So we want it to be easier for you guys to do your jobs and to make everything equal and as easy for all the students that we have on campus. Like Dana talked about, the form that you're getting, the single student checklist, that's also online. Whew, timed out.
We have feature word speak, PDF Adobe, and then some color schemes. If you have a struggling reader, even if they don't have a disability, please contact us. We'll try to help every student out there. That's our goal. So we have some programs on the computer that will read handouts to students, no matter who they are. So we can either show you how that works. IT knows how they are. We have them on all student computers so that we teach students if they need that. So they might be an ESL learner. So we have ways and strategies to help them as well. So contact us with anything, or send any student our way, whether they have a disability or not. Just say, hey, I know that they have some programs that might help you. We'll help all of those students. The last thing real quick is service animals. We do allow service animals on our campus. It does have to be a service animal. We do not allow just pets to come onto the campus. We do not allow comfort animals onto our campus. If you have questions with the service animal, I would recommend that you either contact myself or you contact Todd DePorter, who's the head of security.
Right there.
And Todd's number's up there. John Foltz might be one too that you could contact. There's if a person comes in with a dog, there's 2 questions you can ask. And this, like in education, there's pendulum swings one way or the other. Right now we're so far onto the side that students with service animals have all the rights. We're starting to kind of slowly come back. Eventually, as in education, we'll get there, and then it'll swing the other way. We know how this works. There's only 2 questions you can ask, and it can be pretty sticky if the student feels like you're starting to integrate them or make them uncomfortable with the service animal. The questions are, is this animal required because of a disability? And what work task is the animal trained to perform? You cannot ask to see a demonstration. You cannot ask to see the documentation. You cannot ask to see if this is a certified animal. We can ask to see that it's got the shots for city ordinances. The other thing we ask is that the animal needs to be on a leash at all times, unless the individual with the need is unable to hold on to a leash, right? So they might be in a wheelchair and unable to handle the leash. Other than that, we ask that the student has their dog on a leash at all times while they're walking. Now, again, common sense dictates if they're in the classroom and the dog's sitting at the feet, they don't have to hold on to the leash. I get calls about that all the time too. That's okay, common sense just kind of dictates. But as they're moving around, the dog must be on the leash. If it's not on a leash, my biggest recommendation for you is to either call my office or to call Todd DePorter and we'll handle it.
Don't take a picture of it with your cell phone.
And I wouldn't, you know, you may or may not want to address the student, depend on, yes it has, you may or may not want to address the student, depending on what kind of relationship you have with the student. Service animals is our new hot topic, as it is on every campus. It's a little bit touchy at times on how you work through that. You know, and it's because we have some who are dog lovers and some who are not. And when you have those two dog populations coming together in a closed classroom, it becomes a little bit interesting. They need to be on a leash, no longer need to have a vest. It may or may not be on the faculty notification letter that you get. Sometimes a student comes into our office, but a student with an accommodation of needing a service dog does not have to come through the DAS office. So there are many students on this campus. I shouldn't say many. There's a couple of students on this campus with a dog. I don't know who they are. I've seen them is all. They don't have to come through the DAS office, so it might not be on your letter. A lot of them do because they just don't want to get asked those questions again and again, so they just get it taken care of ahead of time. And I talked to you about all the other things. And it must be in possession. So that means, you know, if it starts barking, if it kind of snaps, if it kind of whines, please, please, please notify my office, because it's probably happening in other classes and we need to get it addressed. That's been our #1 problem, is it's happening in every class and everybody turns the other way.